Okay, as you can see on the bench, we have a Tram D201A. I had, jump here, turn the power supply off. In the process of restoring this one for a customer. So I was going to change all of the electrolytic capacitors and all of the 1 and 2 watt resistors were going to get changed in this anyhow. So my procedure normally is I don't even bother turning them on and trying to diagnose problems. In my experience, 90 to 95% of those problems you're probably going to fix just by changing all of those electrolytic capacitors and high wattage resistors to start with, especially the resistors, because the majority of, especially the 2 watt ones, are baked in these radios. Common problem. That's why I always upgrade the 1s to 2 watts and the 2 watts to 3 watts, or even 5 watts. But in any case, so like I say, I always change those first. There's no use, going through spending God knows how much time trying to diagnose problems only to find out that 90 to 95% of the problems that you diagnosed are just going to be parts you're going to replace a few minutes later. So I do all that work first. So that's what I did. Replaced all the electrolytic capacitors, to include the can capacitors, changed all the high wattage resistors, checked all the tubes, did replace a few of the tubes that were either weak or bad, showed shorts, and the camera is completely out of focus here. What's up with this thing? There we go. It's come back into focus. So, in any case, I finally get it, I power it up, and it has no receive or transmit. No problem. We'll do some simple diagnostics on it. Problem was located on the BA board. Now, this is a very common problem spot in these radios. For starters, it sits beside this big 6L6 audio tube. You've got a bunch of other high wattage resistors right here. There's just a lot of heat. And then to top it off, there's a lot of hot parts on this thing. There's a lot of high wattage resistors. So this radio is in very good condition. Even this one, you can see how dark the board is. So, like I say, common problems. A lot of times you'll find burned traces, even just burned off of the board. They're so bad. But the problem was located on this board. So I had already replaced all the resistors and the electrolytic capacitors on it, but ended up being semiconductors. So I replaced all of the semiconductors. So the bridge rectifier, the Zener diode, and the transistor were all replaced also. So pretty much the only thing left on here is a couple small wattage resistors and this poly cap. It was about the only thing left. Other than the fuse, someone had stuck a gigantic fuse holder on here and had like I think a 3 amp fuse in it. So yeah, a good way to let the smoke out of your radio, like I always say on anything, not just little fuses on these boards, any fuse. Never put higher current rated fuses in. So this board should have 10th amp. Sometimes you stick a 8th amp in there, might be okay. But like I say, in any case, replaced all that. Put the board back in. Still no receiver transmit. So my fault. I should have checked the work that I just did to make sure that fixed the problem on this board. I didn't. I went back in, troubleshooting the channel selector synthesizer board. Spent a few minutes on that only to find that I got low voltage. Well, why did I have low voltage? Because low voltage coming out of the BA board or the low voltage power supply. Somewhere along the line, and this was my fault, and I actually screwed up twice on this one. Now, I keep my parts extremely well organized. Everything's inventoried, cross-referenced part numbers, and even quantities. So when I get low, it automatically flags in my computer that I need to reorder stuff. Just Zener diodes alone, I think I've got, this is box D2, I think I've got 3, maybe 4 boxes of just Zener diodes. So I go over to my box, look the part number up, pull box D2 out, I go in, and the Zener diode on this board should be a 1N4744A, or a 15 volt 1 watt Zener diode. So I go in here, and there it is. And I've just reach in, pull a diode out, slap it on the board there. Like I say, stuck it in, didn't work. Come to find out, when I was troubleshooting, now what you're supposed to have on this board, this pin right here, which is the, when you're looking at the board this way, it's the right hand pin. We can get the camera to focus. It's the right hand pin on that transistor. You should have 14.4 volts on this one right here that my fingernail's on, okay? And I only had 7 point something volts. And I'm like, what the hell's going on here? I check at the Zener diode and I got like 8.2 volts. Well, somewhere along the line, and this was my screw up. Now I always try to make sure I check the part numbers when I order parts and receive them in. I check the part numbers before I put them into inventory, before I put them in the little envelopes here or whatever they're going in, parts cabinet. And then when I take a part out to use it, I always try to remember to check the part number before I install it. Well, apparently I screwed that one up twice. I didn't check it when I put it into inventory, and I didn't check it when I put it onto this B&A board, because the Zener diode that I pulled out of this pack right here, 15 volts, it was an 8.2 volt Zener diode. It was a 1N, 4738, I think. Matter of fact, I'll look here. 7.5. Yeah, it was this one, 8.2 volts. Somewhere along the line, when I ordered parts, I apparently received the wrong thing, put them into inventory, and then, like I say, broke my own rule a second time, didn't check it before I installed it, in the radio, and what I ended up with was like 7 point something volts here, instead of, I should have 14.4 volts, so it was, this thing was operating at a little bit less than half the voltage, and that's why it wasn't working. So, it doesn't matter how many radios you've worked on over the years, you're an expert, you're a novice, you have no experience. Of course, you need some experience working with electronics before you start diagnosing repairs, but this is just a little tip. It's one of those things, it happens to all of us, and this is a prime example. Broke my own rule about checking part numbers, didn't, and it came back and bit me in the ass. Now, luckily, it didn't take me long to diagnose the problem. Like I say, I quickly found I had low voltage here, and I went from having no voltage on the original problem, to my voltage being at 7 point whatever volts. And like I say, troubleshot that down to the Zener diode that I had just replaced was the wrong one. Now, luckily, it was a lower voltage. If I had, let's say, maybe not in this circuit, I don't think that it'd be able to generate enough voltage to damage anything in a synthesizer circuit, but in, let's say, another circuit, if it, because this regulator circuit only receives like around 25 volts DC, and then the regulator drops that voltage down to 14.4. So, with losses in the circuit, it would have been the below 20 volts is the most it could have produced, no matter what Zener diode I installed. But let's say this circuit had 100 volts DC or more, and the wrong Zener diode I had installed might have been a 50 or 100 or 120 volt Zener diode. Well, that could have damaged a lot of components on this board. So the semiconductors on this board possibly. So always double check. Like I say, I completely dropped the ball on that one. I didn't check. Like I say, it was fairly easy to quickly track down. It could have been even quicker if I had just checked. As soon as I saw I still didn't have receive and transmit, just gone in. How hard is it to stick, ground clip to the chassis, test probe down, and I would have automatically seen, well, the voltage is I do have voltage now, it's just too low. But like I say, there's a little tip for you. Always check your part numbers, because you can receive the wrong parts, and then, at a later date you go to use them and find out it's causing problems. Like I say, my procedure is normally to check parts before they go in inventory, and then check parts again before I stick them in something. So, same thing with resistors, capacitors, all that. Anytime I pull one out of a drawer, especially some cabinets, like, let me just reach up here and pull down a drawer. Let's say, half-watt metal films here, you're pulling resistors out, and another one gets mixed in, and it gets dropped in the wrong thing. So I always try, anytime I pull a part out, I always try and check, make sure it's the right value, tolerance, or whatever. And, because parts can get mixed up, and that's why you always want to check those parts before you use them. So, little tip, check your part numbers, save yourself some headaches.